What's up, theology nerds? This is Tripp. And guess what? I know what podcast you're listening to. The Homebrewed Christianity podcast, bringing you zesty ideological ingredients so you can brew your own faith. We don't want to think with you. I know we do, actually. I can't even think for myself and use a complete sentence there, but you can think for yourself. Well, I think with you, and I bring all these ingredients up in your earpiece, and you can think with them. That's what we try to do in Homebrewed. So today, James Ryan Parker of the Killer Cereal podcast. You should check it out, Killer Cereal podcast. He and Elder Tony Jones have a podcast called Killer Cereals. And they talk about cereals, like TV cereals, that are killer, metaphorically, non-violently. Anyway, he has that. And so James Ryan Parker and Barry Taylor, like the one and only Barry Taylor, we're going to talk about the best Jesus movie of all time, Jesus of Montreal. Now, I've not had this verified by anyone other than me, but I like Jesus of Montreal best of all the Jesus movies, and we're about to talk about it. So, this is your spoiler warning. We're going to say lots of stuff about Jesus of Montreal. Personally, I think you could listen to this if you haven't seen it, enjoy it, then go watch a movie, and then re-listen to it again. I think if you have seen it, you're going to listen to us and enjoy it, and then be like, boom, that was crazy. I can't believe Barry and Ryan made this happen, and now I'm going to have to go watch it again. It could go either way. But most of all, if you're going to listen and you use it, and you are leading a discussion group or something, let us know how it works. We're thinking of making an ebook of discussion guides for all the different Jesus movies that we do, so that if you have a pub group, you have a reading group, you have a small group, Sunday school group or whatever, film group, you could nerd out with a little discussion guide for all the Jesus movies. That's what we're thinking. But you gotta tell us if it's worth it. So you should tell us on the Twitter. I'm at Tripp Fuller. And you can also at Homebrewed Christianity, but I replace Christ with an X. I'm sorry, but that's mostly for Twitter purposes. The 140 characters are not taking Christ out of Christmas, just out of Homebrewed Christianity. Let me know on the Twitter, on the Facebook, go to the Homebrewed page, or you can go to the website and leave a message. But tell us, say that would be awesome if you had discussion guides for the Jesus movies. And, because if you're into groups where you discuss stuff, that's great. Maybe you're in a group and you've been reading my book, or you're thinking about reading my book. If you do, holler at me, because I would like to Skype in Q&A and talk it up with your reading group. I've been doing it a couple times. It's a bunch of fun. And I'm just I should do this more often. I should tell people. Other people asked. I said, yes, it was fun. Now I'm just telling you. If you're reading the Homebrewed Christianity Guide to Jesus with a group of people, preferably ones that purchased the book, because this is kind of the idea, is you get your friends to read the book, and then they're oh, okay, we could read this book, and then you become the cool friend because the author Skypes in. You can even tell me jokes to say that apply in your area or whatnot. I don't care. I'm just saying, we scratch each other's backs around a Jesus book. And if you haven't even read my book yet, that's cool too. You can text freaking awesome to 44222 and you'll get sent the first chapter right now. And in it is where I give the ontological, philosophical definition of what it means to call Jesus freaking awesome. So if you text freaking awesome without a space to 44222, you'll get the first chapter. Boom shakalaka. Yeah. All right. Now we're going to talk about a movie. Jesus of Montreal, best Jesus movie ever. And if you want to talk more, then you should think about coming to the Wild Goose Festival in July. Use the code GooseCast2016 to get a discount, 25% off. I'll be in Canada, Vancouver, Canada, later in July, with Sally McFay, John Cobb, and Jay McDaniel going to process that junk up. It's going to be pretty sweet. All right. And okay. Here we go, theology nerds. Jesus of Montreal. But remember, you should let us know if you like it. The movies, sessions with Barry Taylor and Ryan Parker. Ladies and gentlemen, people that like Jesus on films, even ones that show in the cinema, emphasis on the sin because he forgives it.
And the ma, because his mother loved him to the end.
Yes. And today we're going to talk about Jesus of Montreal. What's up, Barry?
Hello, Tripp. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. What about yourself, Ryan J. Parker?
I'm good.
I'm
good.
How good?
I'm good.
And
It's
how's
good.
Glenn doing?
Are you good though, really?
Yeah.
I mean, is that like self-determined goodness?
It's okay. Yeah.
So we are going to talk about Jesus of Montreal.
Bien sûr, certainement.
That's right. That's right. So we
Should we do it all in French?
Oh, redneck French.
I fart in your general direction. That's that's all the French I got.
Yeah.
But but maybe we can talk about that type of French when we talk about Life of Brian. But today we're going to talk about Jesus of Montreal, which is one of my favorite films in general, but one of my definite favorite.
Could we say a companion piece to the film we talked about last time?
It's my favorite Jesus
the
movie.
Temptation of Christ.
Yeah. So
is your favorite Jesus movie as well?
I think Jesus of Montreal. I think, yeah.
And so it's a doozy. It's a doozy, and it's underwatched.
Underwatched. Well, 1989. So
from Canada,
lost in the annals.
So the Jesus of Montreal. We're going to end up talking about a whole host of topics.
Yep,
that's what I'm talking about.
We have a whiteboard.
I wrote on it.
You're producing the hell out of this.
That's what I'm talking about. We're going to talk about the Passion Play. We're going to talk about the church and the economy and the church and the politics of its story.
And sex. And
capitalism and advertising and apocalypse and Jewish versions of the resurrection at a hospital. Woo! That's right.
That's right.
Boom, shakalaka. But little did we know until Dr. Taylor here told us the origin story of said movie, Jesus of Montreal.
It's a sort of accidental, really. Apparently, the director was auditioning. His name is Denis Arcand, perhaps. Was auditioning people, and a guy showed up with a beard and apologized for showing up for an interview or an audition with a beard, but he was playing Jesus in a Passion Play down the street. Mm-hmm. So the director went to watch the play, and he really noted that it was fairly mediocre, but the crowd responded incredibly enthusiastically, so he decided to make a movie about Jesus, which I think is brilliant.
It is.
And apparently the even though it's not stated, the setting for the film is the very place where he saw this Passion Play being acted out.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, that's Trivial Pursuit right there.
One of the more authentic reasons for making a Jesus movie.
It's more honest.
Yeah.
So why don't you set the scene, Parker? Because hopefully you actually have watched the movie before listening to this.
Us or the audience?
Yeah, the people listening.
Oh, the people listening.
Or they're going to listen and get enough that they want to go watch it.
I thought that was the whole idea.
But the goal is that it leads to them to being able to discuss it and such.
Indeed.
But the Jesus of Montreal, why would Jesus go to Canada and not America?
The free healthcare. Is marijuana legal in Canada?
I'm sure.
Possibly.
Free healthcare, the Queen, good public transportation.
Not the beer.
On the West Coast and the East Coast.
Yeah.
Mounties.
Milk and bags.
Do we want to talk about the film?
Yeah.
The Toronto blessing.
Yeah. If you haven't seen the movie, then you just heard the phrase Jesus of Montreal. When I talk Last Temptation, you don't have to tell them where they are, what time period it is. It's just a creative.
So it's a modern day tale, right?
Yeah. So Barry's the kind of the behind the scenes, how it came to be is, I mean, that's also the movie in a real way. It's about this struggling acting troupe, I would say, these friends, and they're all at kind of various stages of the career. Jesus is a struggling actor. The actor who plays Jesus in the Passion Play, the eventual Passion Play, is a struggling actor. His friends are doing whatever work they can get. I think one's a waitress. One is dubs audio for porn. Yeah. So they find out.
A very funny scene.
Yeah. So there's a church, a local church that its Passion Play is struggling, to put it lightly, and they step in and say, "Hey, look, we can do this better." So it's about them creating and wanting to put kind of a fresh twist on the play. And so that opens up opportunities for them to do some research, right, into not only into the Gospels, but into the kind of the historical Jesus.
Yeah.
And then they, on the night of the play, there's a tragic event that leads to the death of Jesus on the cross. Well, shortly after he's been on the cross. And then there's a whole beautiful scene of, again, of that death and resurrection that I think is just as kind of powerful and meaningful as any other kind of standard Jesus fare.
One of the things that the movie does by making this a crisis of power that becomes a crisis of identity for the church, for the actors, and you even bring the whole city into it. The first few nights, more and more people
it's a hit.
Find out about the passion, and it starts growing, and then the priest who's in charge of the church is like, well, we need to edit this. Oh, we need to fix this. We don't want like an actual theatrical production. We need you to tell the same story you've always told. The moment people start to take notice,
and don't research.
Yeah, don't research.
Don't read anything outside of the gospel.
People don't want to be told anything.
Yeah.
What I find so fascinating by this is that in different little vignettes, you see a conglomeration of the challenges to the church's authority that combine to make up what you could call kind of postmodernism. So voiceover guy, not the porn voiceover guy, the other one is like at the Science Museum telling the story of the cosmos and saying how little human beings are in the planet. Later, he like Nietzsche style reflects on it, and you're reminded this passion story took place on this odd planet. It's about a homeless dead Jew in the middle of a cosmos where we're almost nobody.
In the middle of nowhere.
In the middle
of nowhere.
Yeah. Then you get a bit on the historical Jesus stuff, where like now after the Enlightenment, you have the challenge from the historical Jesus to our confessions that are contained in this passion narrative. You get the secular culture pointing out to the priest, the only reason you like this story is because you were born here. And if you were born in the other place, then you would have liked this. All of the stories we tell ourselves are just situated stories. They're arbitrary, accidental to where we're born. So what's the big deal? And then what's the big deal with changing it? Why are you taking it so seriously? Then you get the challenge that comes from, what would you call it? Like the social economic powers of the day, that the actual telling of the story in the church as dealing with the compromised, church desire to have power and control. It's connected to the exploitation of good stories capitalistically through the economy, that there are so many of these little elements that, the passion story itself and its grandiose vision is hard to take seriously. And the ones that are taking it seriously are the ones that aren't even sure whether or not they really believe it. But in telling the story and wrestling with it, they come to embody it deeper as a community and
they're
friends.
they exist on the fringes too. Those people.
The marginal people. Yeah, it's very interesting. And, I think the director strikes a really interesting piece of ground, because he kind of pits the playing out of this story with a fairly obvious disdain for institutional religion, but he's not any happier with the secularity of society, the sort of exploitive. In some ways, I think the accusations go both ways. It's about sort of exploitive power, hunger for fame, cheap consolation. So, we don't want your research because people just want to know that God loves them. They just want the comfort of a particular theological lullaby. Yeah. And in the culture, people are just embracing consumption and stuff, sex, whatever it is, just to kind of lull themselves. I mean, it's very Freudian. You could talk about Freud's palliatives play.
Well, I think the priest is the best example.
Yeah.
So the priest who's running it, who's the one who has people over his shoulder going, you can't, it's too popular. Oh, they're changing it. You're running, the reason this story's here is so people come and they leave their crutches. There's a scene where the priest is looking at it. Do what I'm telling you to do. Yeah. Don't try to change things, because look, you're really here to tell a story. People get healed or something or another. Yep. You at least give them comfort. And it's like in that moment, there's this breakdown where the priest is in love with Mary in the equivalent of Mary in the
a little ragtag group of the gospel collective here, the house they're all staying at and stuff, the mother figure, they're in love. And so you have like this weird, like, authority of the church telling the story what to do, but the authority of church telling him what to do.
Yeah.
And then the weird thing, like, but not everything here is bad. Like, I can point at people's lives that are better.
Sure. Yeah. No. Yeah. I mean, and again, that's why you have to watch these films. And I mean, watch them.
Yeah.
And really pay attention to the subtle kind of nuances in because while there's obviously a critique of life in general, really, both religious and non-religious, there's also affirmation on both sides of the equation that in the midst of the criticism and the challenges, there are those small pockets or small moments where good comes. You know, it's not really modern where it's either good or bad or different or indifferent. I think it really does strike again at the end of the 80s, a different tone. And, you know, again, the 80s, at least in America, which probably had an impact on Canada, was defined as, you know, the decade of greed. You know, it's the Wall Street movie decade with Michael Douglas, where there was the valorization of wealth and power and fame that we're still living on the exhaust fumes of. And along comes this film, and it really just, in a very, you know, and I think it's kind of cool the way it's a little story. You know, it's not some grand passion play. It's not like, you know, the Crystal Cathedral's balls to the wall, you know, Easter glory
It's
thing,
definitely,
you know,
like shoestring budgeting, 5 total people involved.
Yeah. And they don't really know what they're doing. They've just sort of got this idea, and it's playing out as kind of social criticism in a really profound way. And it's not such a grand tale that it conquers anything. You know, it can't sort of compete with the power of the church, really, and it can't compete with the power of the broader society, and yet it exists in this kind of powerful way in the middle of all of that.
I don't know that any Jesus film has taken such a hard stance against capitalism as this one, like explicitly, and it not feeling, because it doesn't feel heavy-handed to me.
No. Well, I think I might go out on a limb there and say that of the films that we're going to look at, because, you know, Pasolini in his own way.
Sorry. Yeah.
But that's a European film. This is a Canadian film. Neither are American films. Do
you think this is a film?
I think is quite different.
I should have done some more research into this, but I think there's probably some funding for this movie from Canada, from the state, right?
Yeah,
probably.
Which is again an added.
It's a country that cares about the arts.
Yeah, I was at an academic conference at AAR once, and people giving papers on film or whatever, and the student from Canada gave a paper, and before he began, he said, "I would like to thank Canada for providing funding for this trip." So then he gave his paper. It was very good. And then somebody stood up afterwards, and his American student and said, "I would like to thank the United States for jack shit."
I got to call Liz. It's her 90th birthday. Maybe she's feeling generous.
I think there's a couple places that the story of Jesus is intimately connected, where if in a lot of the political tellings, the empire, you know, of Rome could get correlated to another political empire. Here, it's an economic one.
Yeah.
So, you get, who are the disciples? In this, actually, I think a fascinating show of who the outcasts are. Yeah. So they aren't these destitute, poor, dirty people. They're actually people who get to have no integrity to hold their place on the outskirts of a system. Yeah. Right? Like voice actors doing these read over, selling yourself, your body and stuff. They have a place in the system, but they don't get to have a conscience or integrity about anything, or you lose your space and someone else fills it.
I think that's a great read. And if you spend long enough time in Los Angeles, it completely changes the way that you think about it. It should have changed the way you think about actors and actresses, 99% of whom are told you're not good enough 99% of the time. Nobody else has a job like that where you're humiliated constantly. Yeah. And and even actors who have made it, have to do what you're talking about. You have to toe some sort of creative economic line to stay.
I think there's a kind of very profound and challenging notion in what you just said, because I think we in general in the church tend to make that kind of marginalized issue a very specific thing, and everybody else is just privileged. And I think that's way too simplistic a notion of really. I think there of course there's dire poverty and dire marginality, but most people exist in a strange kind of ether between that. And I think that's the sort of way. I mean, it's.
We discussed it during one of the classes, and Jörg Rieger describes it by saying, like, there's actually something very helpful for talking about the 99%.
Yeah.
Because you can have a different location in the 99%.
Yeah.
But you only get that spot by performing the function. You are replaceable.
Yeah.
And there are certain benefits, right, that come from playing a certain role. But the problem that gets brought up, I think, really helpful here is, like, you would think, oh, you get to act for a living? What? I mean, you're complaining?
Absolutely,
come on.
yeah.
You are in advertising, or you're making film or whatever. The one place where the artists are set free to do their art is the story of Jesus. Yeah. And then what shape does it take? A critique to the very system that had made them do all these weird things, or a lack of integrity. And most of our members of different communities, especially at churches where you would bring up questions of justice, this helped point out, like, no, justice isn't about just like the 2%.
Yeah.
It's that our systemic relations economically keep people in slavery via debt, via vocation, in the system, and that the solidarity we need is one that's deep enough to challenge it. And in this movie, the community tries, and they get literally crushed.
Yeah. Well, so I think I've talked about this before, but, Nicholas Nasser Taleb says the only difference between a slave and a person with a monthly salary is the slave knows they're not free. Yeah. And I think there's an element of that where we would go, oh, well, the theological move is to champion the slave. Yeah. But it might just be that you champion the slave and the person who's held captive by the monthly salary, who's immobilized to some degree by a system that, cause you have to, it seems to me that in the current climate, you just have to sort of work out how much debt you can afford to be in. That's the calculation for life. Yeah. It's not what can I afford. It's how much debt can I afford to be in.
Yeah. So if you are
come the revolution, Tripp, when the Canadians come down.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I think this is helpful. So, like, Ryan, like, when you think of those moments in Jesus's life, that they can get retold here in connection to, like, raising to conscious, like, the awareness of our economic oppression. Which ones were, like, the ones that you're like, oh yeah, that was awesome?
Well, I think it's the temptation scene where, this ad exec essentially is walking through this high rise with Jesus, and he's essentially showing him the city and promising him wealth, which we all know is a lie, that security comes with that, right? But that the implied security that comes with it. And he's really wanting to market his story, right? Or his identity, for financial gain. And Jesus says no. And I think there's a certain weight to that scene that is more powerful for us than, say, the biblical narrative of Jesus' temptation. Because as Barry's already said, we're not, it's not that we've put our faith in wealth. It's that we're even going so far as to put it in debt, right? That as long as I can have these things, and I don't even really own them, I would rather do that for the sense of comfort or security it brings than I would choose to live another way, as you consistently talk about, Tripp.
The difficulty of striking another path, which I think the film also brings up, because they're hemmed in on both sides. You know, both sides have an agenda for the actors. The priest has a very specific agenda for what he wants them to accomplish. And so does the advertising guy, you know what I mean? And striking that balance in the middle. I think that again, that brings up the theme that we sort of hit in The Last Temptation about, without, you know, putting too fine a point on it, spirituality versus religious response, if you're going to make those delineations. But you know what I mean? Like the institutional religious response to requirements and demands upon the text, you know, so the institution puts a demand upon the text in a certain way, right?
I think if the way you could frame it here would be like the religion of Jesus versus the religion about Jesus. Yeah. Because it's like this artist community's discovery of the historical Jesus that functions to inspire the critiques. And then the critiques end up not just having the Roman enemy, but the religious enemy in the market and in the churches.
Which, of course, is the Jesus story.
Yeah. So
surprisingly.
But what about the cleansing of the temple scene?
Yeah.
So, well, go ahead.
No, I mean, Jesus walks in on an audition. Yeah. Right. And
which is kind of an interesting.
And they're asking this woman to basically get naked for this.
Who's the Mary
audition.
Magdalene character?
Yeah. And he just goes crazy and he turns all the tables over and he throws a fit. And it's one of those moments, it feels like for an actor, if you do that, you're immediately going to hear you're never going to work in this town again. You're completely out. But yet he does it anyway. Yeah. At what is probably great risk to his own future. Yeah. For her to kind of preserve her integrity and challenge that system.
That's a very interesting way of tackling that tale, by casting it in that light. So it's in his world. Like what's the temple that needs to be, what needs to be overturned in the temple of his acting world? Maybe it's that exploitive audition process, or, the system itself, so maybe you can sort of see that.
The ad is over the top. There's also an ad with him in it that is on a billboard at the very end when he's having his apocalyptic breakdown. But the other side of the temple scene being connected to an advertisement audition and not a movie one is that the system stays in power, not in the art that's there. It's in the things that are in between the TV shows. Sure. That through advertising, you're creating in people the desire that then keeps them bound to a system that they know is oppressive. And here she is, oppressed and wanting something different, and then acting and giving herself to be exploited to create stuff to keep the system in power.
Yeah. Well, James Twitchell has that book, Lead Us into Temptation. Have you ever read that? It's worth a read. He's an English professor, but he writes a lot about advertising. And one of his arguments in that book is that advertising is the spiritual language of capitalism. So, and he sort of charts the way in which, especially at the dawn of, like in the 1920s, Calvin Coolidge and stuff addressed the Association of American Advertisers and literally said, your work is the spiritual work of our country, blah, blah, blah. And he goes through and sort of charts that. And, you think about how advertising works. It employs the language of the metaphors of religion. This product will save your soul. This will give you comfort. This will give you peace. So I think it's quite a profound, I don't know how calculated it was by the filmmaker, but from the worlds that I inhabit, both of theology and advertising, I read that sort of quite in a very sort of prescient way, and went, that's really neat, because what you're actually really addressing is the spiritual, the religion of capitalism, which is the mechanism of advertising, which places the burden of the law of consumption upon people, just as you place the burden of the keeping of the law upon people and break their backs, which Jesus challenged.
And we talked about TV a little bit today. I mean, you talk about Mad Men, and we point that out. We serialize that. Yeah. And we kind of lionize these people who were kind of, if it was birthed in the 20s, then it kind of comes to maturity in the 50s and 60s.
Sure. I mean, it's a very, advertising is very overlooked in terms. We critique it from a sort of capitalist, and we talk a lot about, consumerism and stuff like that. But from a theological perspective, I think that's where the real work with dealing with advertising really needs to go.
The one of the parts I find fascinating about the emphasis of it just being the passion play. So with the kind of research about the historical Jesus and the political nuances of it getting put into Passion Week, one of the things that gets brought to the surface in the experience for those that go is that the Passion Week drama isn't just the events of Passion Week. The way they do it, where Daniel, the actor who's playing Jesus, is like in the crowd doing the speeches of Jesus, talking, looking in the face, people that are at the Passion Play from stop to stop. All the stuff they're adding, is communication and telling of Jesus's own passion for the world. So the Passion Play, which when it becomes something that you market to fulfill the desire you have to, I guess, not be eternally tormented consciously or something. You have a passion play and you got this nice transaction of forgiveness or whatnot. What they end up introducing because of their historical research is Jesus' own passion for the world, for the other, the outcast, for healing and justice. And that's odd. What does the church want out of their passion play? They say it's the historical Jesus research, but the stuff that makes them uncomfortable is the actual passion of Jesus, the kingdom of God.
Yeah, well, it's a bit like the question that you raised last week, like what is the weight of the cross? How do we understand that? In what way is that framed? And I think in this film, that kind of reversal of passions. Mm-hmm. So the passion in the Passion Play is the other way around. It's not the passion for the eternal or the immaterial, but it's actually the passion for imminent incarnational material world that's troubled by systems of corrupt power on both sides. So the gospel parallels to me just keep resonating through this film. The
one of the elements that you see running through it are the voices of the cultural critics and elites.
Yeah.
And they are caricatures of themselves. But you have these characters doing like news talk radio about the art and the theater and they're just so excited or whatever. And what you end up noticing is their feelings about the Passion Play change completely once people start responding to it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't what they were expected to respond. And then the moment they do, they're like, oh, it's so moving. And there's blah, blah, blah.
It's like the film critic. Why is nobody listening to us? Why are people going to see this movie?
So and what I always find interesting about those characters in it is their response during the experience of the Passion Play. I think they show to us how so many of us that know the story naturally relate to the story we hear every year, right, during Holy Week and Easter. They are showing up clearly as a spectator, assessing the telling of it this time, looking for something new, and Daniel breaks the fourth wall during it.
Yeah.
But in the address, all of a sudden they have to go into the story. So you see cultural critic stop being cultural critic and be human.
Yeah.
And it even happens with the priest who's been complaining. They do it with him. And when he's like, you can't do this, and they go ahead and they push through, they do it against his will. He is being moved and shedding his priestly collar, but being brought in the story all the while, having to go through and call the cops and bring this in. There's to me, that's one of the more, when you get the snippets of the Passion Play, you could either draw attention to the historical parts they, highlight. Oh, what if Mary was raped by a Roman soldier and that's where Jesus came from? Or something like that. Or you could recognize all that stuff's built around the passion story being something that humanizes people out of their roles in these systems. The priest becomes a human. even the cultural critics become humans. Who is it that never does? The guy who was Mary Magdalene character's boyfriend and the director. Yeah. That's the person who does not glimpse the possibility of redemption. It's the image of the market.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's a little bit of a lesson there in terms of how to approach looking at a film, because all too often there are these moments in a movie, whether it's, that notion of Mary Magdalene, Roman soldier, and that's where Jesus came from, or, Jesus getting married in The Last Temptation, or whatever that trope is that comes from the outside that becomes an affront to the religious sensibilities of somebody. But maybe the first task is to try and grasp the spirit of the piece before we criticize the various pieces inside that, but to go, what's going on here? Before I sort of break it down into the bits that I'm offended by or the bits that I like or stuff like that, is there an overarching storyline here that has something to say that's filtered through all these dynamics, which I think that's why films work, is because they do have that. Then you can sort of go down to the next level, and then you can sort of put that comment about Mary Magdalene and the Roman soldier. You might not like it, but it doesn't become the central motif of the story then, and I think that's where I get a little frustrated sometimes with like theological responses to films. It's like it's the two lines that you don't like that get put. It's like, the precious Bible promises that you put on a fridge. It's the reverse of that. You sort of isolate the bit that's wrong with the movie when it's really just a part of a larger piece that has some profound things to say if we'll let it talk to us.
This feels like you could also flip this analysis and apply it to critics of religion.
Yeah.
To a lot of critics of religion who are like, well, I don't really go for the miracles.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, this is not really what we're talking about, right? Or like,
yeah, I heard this quote once. I forget. I think it was Beethoven. Somebody said, they didn't mind if a musician played a bum note, but they got really angry if they missed the spirit of the piece. And I think there's a good lesson there. Doesn't mean that you ignore or overlook the things that don't work. And it doesn't mean that if you're a composer or something, you don't go back and go, try not to hit that bum note again. But it's not the whole, it's not the whole story. The story is, it's like you play a piece of music. You can go note by note and you can play it technically perfectly, or you can take the Miles Davis approach and play what's not there and play the same thing, and suddenly it's revolutionary.
Yeah.
And I think with films, when it comes to, if we're sort of talking about these movies in the context of people looking at films and thinking about them, getting the spirit of the film and really trying to work out what the major, like Polaniuk called them the horses that run through his movies. What are the horses that you ride through from beginning to end, and how do you follow those? Then these other little pieces start to fit in, because you realize that what's going on here in this critique of the way the institution handles religion are these little barbs that go, well, maybe you don't have the story down. Maybe that's just a little dig in your side to make you be a little more reflective, a little less confident about what you claim to know, a little more aware of the complexity of the story and the possibility of other options and other answers to some of these questions that we think we've got the goods on.
Yeah.
The first scene, I think it's the first time that the priest is telling them that they need to do it different.
Yeah.
And they proceed to give them all the different options you could do.
Yeah.
The play like, oh, would you like to just do this in Shakespeare? He mocks just Shakespeare. You to do it like it goes to different styles. I find that scene is really funny, but it also shows how poorly the correction and the kind of like do this is unrelated to the actual experience or content of the piece of art. They're just like, do it different. And they're like, oh, okay, now that we're doing the thing we thought we were escaping as actors and getting to create our own piece of art, which version do you want? You want us to do the Shakespeare version, the over-the-top serial drama, or the soap opera version? They have a number of them. And I think that's they there are subtly telling the minister what version of
version of this which one are you playing?
Yeah. And how many of us could pick like the little bit we don't like? Well, if they had read NT right, they would know that blah blah blah.
Yeah, exactly.
Or what, and you go doing that, or you see them here going like, look at the. It is actually by attending to the full humanity of Jesus, understanding in a situation and things that the story is so compelling, it becomes spiritualized and then embodied in those very people.
Yeah.
As opposed to this real dualist separation, the humanity of Jesus is what ends up evoking faith in the community that is creating the Passion Play. And so, what do you make of that Daniel's internalization of the role? So in the movie, Daniel, the one that plays Jesus, over time clearly is internalizing Jesus in his prophetic critique in more and more ways, stronger ways.
I mean, maybe again that's a kind of subtle homage to the way in which a powerful story can have an effect on someone's life, and they start to embody it. I mean, it's beyond method acting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He embodies these ideas and undergoes this kind of metamorphosis of at least of his internal life, because this story becomes not just an acting gig, but it becomes a way of being in the world. That's my take, I think.
I was going to initially say that that's my least favorite part about the movie.
Sure.
But then I wonder if it doesn't get it. I talk about this a lot. I don't know if it's if it's something that I'm seeing a lot in what I watch, but I'm really struck by that dichotomy between believing, behaving and belonging. That kind of Phil's Tickle outline versus belonging, behaving, and believing. And I feel like you see the latter with Daniel in the movie, is that he belongs to this community.
Yeah.
They begin to behave by enacting this story.
Yeah.
And then it has a real effect on him. And you wonder if you could somehow interview the character at the end of it, say, do you believe this? He might have a different answer than when the movie started.
Yeah.
Because it does change him. It kills him.
Yeah.
Which is another thing.
Yeah.
I think that if we all really believe and enact the way we should, we would all be dead.
And
a lot quicker than normal.
Well, that's another thing that's very true in The Last Temptation of Christ. If you follow through with faithfulness, you end up exiting early. So that you're uneasy with it, I think is if you watch the movie, you're going to be sitting there and you get uneasy with this movie. You really like how it's going. Oh, this is nice. Got this prophetic edge. They're adding historical. And slowly he internalizes Jesus so much that you realize, oops, the historical Jesus is in a way to make Jesus a liberal Christian for North America, but Jesus is freaking crazy. It's disturbing. It's unnerving.
Yeah.
And what I find that part irritates me, so I've come up with a number of ways to try to figure out how it would serve a purpose. In my new version of it, after in thinking about this conversation, is that so at the very end, the last Passion Play, they bring in the cops. People are so woven into the story and the telling, they get mad that the cops are there, and then this brute of a man goes to basically protect Jesus.
Yeah.
And there's an accident, knocks over the cross.
Yep.
He has a mega concussion. Jesus, or Daniel at this point, can't, he starts having these apocalyptic talks, right? Like he starts saying all the apocalyptic Jesus stuff, and no Christian hospital will take him.
Right.
But the apocalypse, of Jesus doesn't come until you have a collaboration between the state, the economy, and the church that leads to the destruction of Jesus.
Yeah.
And that the only hope they can see is those who are in the story embodying the gospel to the world of essentially the New World Order at this point in the late 80s.
Yeah.
Right? Like, is an apocalypse. Their imagination to escape global capitalism with nation states requires apocalypse to end it. There's not another way out. Yeah. And that is a way in which the internalization of it actually highlights and bring to the fore how there is no innocent person here. We're all complicit. We're all victims and violators, and the world doesn't care about it being different. And that what's being challenged here isn't your understanding of a historical Jesus or your atonement theory based on something or what's being challenged is the very regime of power that has, and when do they all agree to take Jesus out? Like when culture, society, Rome, all these people take him out. Here, how's Daniel die? The time those three things all cooperate, and Jesus goes apocalyptic and has no home in a Christian hospital.
Yeah, no place to lay his head.
No.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting take on that. I mean, I hadn't really sort of put that together quite so nicely, but you're right, that kind of the apocalyptic Jesus emerges when there's nowhere else to go. And there's only nowhere else to go because every other option has been closed off.
Especially the Christian ones.
Well, yeah.
Or they're all the same option.
Yeah. Which again, back in the late 80s, because again, we have to sort of remember this film, and again, you don't know how much awareness there is on the part of the filmmaker, but the environment in which this film appears is one in which rampant greed and wealth and acquisition has taken on a whole new level of engagement. I mean, it's an era, the 80s were a transformative era in advertising. It's when advertising embraced luxury, when luxury became the sort of entitlement of everybody. So if you sort of look in the history of advertising in the 1980s, for lots of reasons as well. I mean, just ads could look different because of new technologies as well, but means of production changed, so luxury became something that was sort of potentially attainable by everybody because it seemed to be everybody's right. Like, why can't I have this? I have the same rights as everybody else. This is when the Gap starts to sell, $90 cashmere sweaters instead of, $500 ones at somewhere else. You know what I mean? So that sort of power structure in the church as well as, or within the institution, that there's it's like the whole society, but on both sides of this story are going off on a galloping horse race in a direction that this story wants to impact.
Yeah, and from a time, like even with advertising and greed, and this is also the time in Hollywood history where your stars in the blockbuster films, there's more money and the salaries are escalating.
Yeah, it's a very interesting period to
keep pace. People are getting paid in fleets of Hummers. These Schwarzenegger's getting paid with planes.
There was some kind of a breakdown around 87 or 88, I think, a little bit, but it's not until you get into the 90s and then in the early 2000s where we really start to get that whole collapse of. But this is the era when all of those things start to get moving, the deregulation of things, the opening up of space that allows for a slow and then faster split of who gets richer, who gets poorer.
Philosophically, the question of the end of civilization, I think, can get phrased in connection to the emergence of
When did Fukuyama write that book? Was that around this time?
Somewhere around
Should I say that in a high voice? Was that around this time? The end of history? But it's when postmodern theory is sort of going a little public. It's 20 years old, but it's going a little more public. There's a sense in which dynamics are shifting, but at the moment they're shifting towards a sense that things are going to go positively. There's a little bit of creeping paranoia. That people are starting to, the technology is starting to take some shifts and some changes. So I don't know, some potent stuff there.
The other question, and Ryan, you had mentioned earlier, was this is your favorite resurrection scene in a movie?
Yes.
But why? Because I didn't get my soul saved in this resurrection, and
You didn't?
I don't think I did either. I think there's something in the kind of the creative approach to it. I mean, I know there's probably a literalism to it that bothers people, some viewers, but I don't know. I just like this imagery of, Tripp, you could talk about this more, but I think the resurrection is a problem for a lot of people. And do people believe in a literal resurrection? Did dogs eat Jesus' body? But I don't know. I think there's something in this, the way in which the character lives on.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little inspiring.
Well, and like sometimes if you're
Gibson's
trying to
resurrection,
yeah,
where I can see this landscape through a hole in Jesus' hand.
Well, and you have that. You have the two parts of the resurrection. One is the body of Daniel, Jesus, actually healing multiple people, which if you notice their passion play is a bit scant on the miraculous.
Yeah, a bit scant.
You find the miraculous in the literal giving of his body to other people. Sure. And you get the scene where the eyes open up, given eyes and parts. And then you have the question of, is the nonprofit fund for the theater company or whatever at the end, is that resurrection, or is that just selling the whole thing off? And obviously they've already killed Jesus because they've created
the community.
Yeah. Is the theater company named in his honor, monetary gift thing, is that missing the entire point? Or is it faithless? Is the church that have just kicked out the passion play connected to Jesus, or is it something else?
Yeah.
Now I hate this movie. No. Damn it, Tripp.
What?
No, it's a good question.
Because I remember initially going, oh, that's so good. Like, you want to have a good ending, right?
Right.
Which is why, the resurrection is a pretty tight ending. You want to have a good one.
Yeah.
And then you're like, and they named it after him, and it's good. It supports real artists.
Yeah.
To do what? Get jobs at all the stuff, all the stuff he's against.
But to some degree, isn't that the nature of the beast? I mean, if we're going to be honest and real, we get up every day in the same system that we were in yesterday. Post-resurrection, we're still living in the same world.
Yeah.
Still attempting the dance, the dance within the system. Serving the system while seeking to serve other aims and other ends. So maybe that's a more honest example. It kind of takes away the utopian aspects of kind of resurrection stories where everything turns into like Shangri-La. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I also think it realizes
Feel
like,
better now, Ryan?
I'm thinking on this. Yeah.
It focuses on how necessary to the story arc the resurrection is for a community to form after it.
Mm.
The formation of the church and things is something where the truth of the story without a resurrection could be true,
but not enough,
but not one you gather at. And I think that gets made in multiple places, and that the whole giving of the body parts to me is like this, this argument, does it matter? Did it matter at all thing with the priest in the middle? You're like, well, did it matter at all? Yeah, that person can actually see now and couldn't.
Yeah.
And how, the emergence of kind of postmodern sensibilities of faith when you're like, the story's amazing. It motivates me, inspires me, and challenges me. It makes me uncomfortable. But did it make a difference? Yeah, I can find one damn thing that made a difference because this person can see. And so I'm going to just have to, I'm going to hang my resurrection hat there and hope for something more. But that's a positive answer to some people.
Yeah. and not enough for others.
And for others, you're like, no.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like the end of Mark, the Gospel of Mark.
Yeah. The tomb is empty, but
Jesus didn't tell him where he went. Someone else spoke on his behalf.
yeah,
and they were scared and didn't tell anyone.
Yeah. Ellipsis.
But I didn't notice if at the end of the movie,
Yeah.
there was one of those like hidden endings that involved snakes.
Like an egg.
Like a good comic book movie.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. Post-credit.
Post-credit sequence.
All
Outtakes.
right, come on. You were ponderous. We're getting all ponderous over there.
I was.
Ryan J.
But I don't
Parker.
know that I'm ready to say what I was pondering.
Oh, I think you're ready, Ryan. Spit it out.
Look at that.
So I recently read this graphic novel called Mary Wept Over the Feet of Jesus by an artist named Chester Brown. And the subtitle's Prostitution and Religious Obedience in the Bible. And so he's looking at all the women in the genealogy of Jesus and asking what links them together. But he's also looking at some of the stories about obedience. So one of the stories is the prodigal son. Another story is about the talents. And he asks a question about, I take that back, sorry. Does the master in the story celebrate the person who wasted the talents because the slave didn't act like a slave? The slave lived a full life in that moment and experienced joy and not kind of imprisonment, right? And that's what God wants. And so he made the slave out in his interpretation to be a whoremonger. I'm using his words. And then he goes and wastes all the money on women and probably booze. And I don't know, I've been thinking about that a little bit over the last couple of weeks about what does God want? Does God want obedience or joy or whatever? And I think it begins to cast elements of this movie in a different light. Because does the temple need to be cleansed in this movie? And maybe so. Maybe it still does because it's about exploitation and abuse. But maybe not all of it's bad. And I have no idea where I'm going with that, but that's what I was thinking about when you told me to say something.
Well, no, I think, now I want Chester
Brown. I'll loan you the book. He has 100, it's a very simple aesthetic to his drawing. They're basically comic strips. So he does the Rahab story and it's maybe, I don't know, 15 or 20 panels, no more than 2 or 3 characters in each panel. Then he does these, but then he's got 100 pages of notes at the end of the book where he talks about the process and the research that he did. He's probably more well read than most biblical scholars or pastors or whatever.
Well, that's actually similar in the movie to where the Passion Play emerges from. Is they took the story so seriously, they went and researched it and thought through it and had this intentionality. And oftentimes, I found that really well told stories whose content and conclusions or what's being presented, I find completely problematic. There's a certain attraction, even if you disagree with it horribly. I've seen some really, really good preachers that just preach shit. Yeah. But there's the art of public speaking or something that,
they read the book.
They were intentional. It wasn't just put together in a formula. To me, the craft of theater or the craft of, retelling those stories or the craft of doing a movie, you can take it seriously, be moved by it, or brought in without necessarily agreeing with it. And a lot of times it's the level of intentionality and stuff that makes you ask the question. And it's somewhat successful if it makes you have 4 or 5 different ways of figuring out the dots at the end.
Maybe this is somewhat related, but I listened to Chance the Rapper's new album over the weekend.
Obviously,
like everybody else, right? And he has a couple of songs on there that are religious in nature, very religious.
Yeah.
And I texted somebody, a buddy of mine who's really into music, and I said, I think I'm listening to these religious songs on Coloring Book the way I listen to most rap songs. Is I don't know that I agree with the message, but damn, they sound really good. There's a craft and an artistry to it. So I can listen to somebody Kanye and his lyrics. I'm if I'm really listening to these lyrics, I'm very disturbed by them, but that's a catchy beat,
It makes you say Jesus.
Yeah, and like the movies, like I don't, like I like Asian shock movies that are uber violent. I'm not a violent person, but man, is there skill and creativity and a lot of work that went into that very good movie, but deeply disturbing.
Well, a story well told is a story well told.
Sure.
And end of story.
And Barry would like for you to tweet that line.
Barry would like to move on to the next movie.
Well, we have to land the plane because we did it so good last time.
Yeah, we did.
Because I think we were just talking and then we hit off.
Did we get everything on the whiteboard with the green writing?
I maybe. Well, I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
Economy, temptation,
resurrection, cleansing of the temple,
body parts, apocalypso.
Yeah, see, we succeeded.
I like that movie.
Apocalypto. I did too, actually.
Too bad it came after the Passion. I think it would have gotten much more praise and celebration had it started before, came out before.
They had very, very similar special effects budgets.
Yeah.
80% blood.
Yep. I think they just used the blood from the other one.
They're like, save this.
Wipe this up.
Well, it's once it's been transubstantiated, you're supposed to finish it before the end of the day. So.
Yeah, it's true actually.
And you don't want
to let the mice get the bread either.
All right.
Apocalypto.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.